Jesus does so much talking in John's 6th chapter. He's bound to get himself into trouble. John's 6th chapter is almost 69 verses, and like I said, it all starts with the feeding of the 5,000 2 weeks ago. That's the first 15 verses, and that was nice. It was a useful action. Jesus was doing something. People were fed and satisfied. But then after he was done preparing all this food, Jesus started explaining things and lecturing, and that's where the problems came. Last week, he scolded those who had eaten because he thought that they were after perishable food, empty calories, rather than the non-perishable, now and always sustenance that Jesus offers. And then this week, Jesus says, I am the bread of life, and I have come down from heaven. And his listeners, who are not on board with him anyway, of course take issue with the absurdity of this utterance. How can he say, I have come down from heaven? It's just Jesus. We know where he came from. We know his parents. So Jesus should have just done miracles and not explained anything afterward. If you think this week's words are problematic, wait until you see the things Jesus says next week. Sometimes I wonder if there's too much talking and explaining in the world. These days, everybody's always supposed to talk about their feelings. And I think maybe that helps sometimes, but not all the time. I've personally found that sometimes talking about feelings can be so aggressively pursued that one ends up feeling things that they wouldn't have felt otherwise, only because they've been forced to talk so much. After I graduated from college, I worked for a big company that really emphasized professional development. So employees were supposed to identify their weaknesses and name them clearly. So you'd be meeting with your supervisor at a status, and you'd say, I need to work on my communication skills. Yes, you do. I've noticed that. Let's talk about that. Yeah, I don't know how. That's the problem. My communication skills. Yes, that is the problem. Exactly. I wonder sometimes if talking about the problem causes the problem. Sometimes I feel that way about faith. When I'm out and about, just an ordinary civilian, people will learn that I'm a pastor, and sometimes they'll pull me aside and say, now what do you really believe? And before I have a chance to answer, they'll tell me what they really believe, and they'll think it's so shocking that I'll self-immolate or lose all my faith. It's not that shocking. It's never that shocking. When people join here as members, they often ask, what are they going to have to do? Expecting some grand inquisition. Thank God there's no such thing here. It makes me sad when people leave churches or don't join churches because of belief. Belief is just a part of what we do here. Sometimes I almost wonder if most of what we believe is almost beside the point. I've never heard someone say, yeah, I quit going to church because I just didn't believe it was worth gathering with people once a week to consider all that life and death includes. That's what church is really about. But sometimes we turn churches into belief systems, and then people quit believing and they quit going. But maybe Jesus causes this with all the talking he does in this 6th chapter of John. Jesus, why don't you just feed people? Be quiet. Cook. Or as St. Francis of Assisi put it, preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. Jesus uses a lot of words, though, and some of the things he says are problematic. How can he say, I have come down from heaven? We know his parents. We know where he came from. Our first reading today which Wendy shared, comes from Ephesians, and it also focuses on words. Wendy read, quote, "Let us all speak the truth to our neighbors." Speak the truth to our neighbors. Do we have to? What if we don't know what the truth is? Or what if we speak and it doesn't make sense? Or what if we speak and it just worsens our relationships with our neighbors? Maybe instead of speaking, we should just eat and drink more, like the beginning of John's 6th chapter, and not the last 54 verses. But when you think about the problem of language and its limitations, I think the outrageousness of Jesus' words might be the point. Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." And he says, "I have come down from heaven." And we know that these are hyperboles, not literal statements, because we're not cannibals, and because Siri can't give us directions to heaven. Jesus' language is aspirational. It's hyperbolic. It's befitting to how life should be, or could be, rather than how life often is. When it comes to the language that we use and the way that we evaluate truth, much of what is said today is so reductive that I think it misses out on the grandeur and wonder of human life. Once upon a time, the psalmist asked, "What are human beings that thou art mindful of them?" And today, a scientist could respond, human beings are animals. Well, what is love? Love is just an evolutionary impulse to spread our genes into the future. What is God? Well, God is just a coping mechanism for our short lives. So what are we left with? Brief, brutal, insignificant existence. But I think all of these accounts are actually ignorant of the real matter of human life. Because somewhere along the way, human life became so rich that we had to employ hyperbole or metaphor like Jesus, because this was the only way to scratch the surface of what all of this is really about. Say you're holding a newborn child in your arms. It's happened billions of times before. Babies are born every day. Nothing special about it. But then in an instant, you gaze into the eyes of that little creature, and you realize that there has never been someone like this before, and there will never be someone like that again. And you realize in your arms you are holding another masterpiece of God. And even though it is just the two of you sitting in that room and that baby can't understand what you're saying, you have to express something. So you remark, "Thank God, you are heaven sent." Or say you find yourself falling in love. Deep, passionate, hot love. You are shocked to find that your mere existence can be a cause for celebration and delight in another person. You never knew that you could be so impactful. And likewise, the other person never knew that they could cause so much joy in another person. And soon, the two of you, in the midst of this overwhelming experience, find yourselves sitting together and uttering these absurd, silly things. Are they prayers? To God? To whom? But something must be said because you feel so much, and you sit together and you say, "Thank God, this is heaven sent." Or say you are sitting with someone who is dying. And in those last moments, as you wait for the rattle of their breath to become air, you find yourself recounting all that they have meant to you. You recall the bad times, and you recall good times, but most of all, you just feel grateful for all the time that you had. And you can't remember it all, and you can't express it all, but you want to summate it somehow. So you hold this person's hand, and you say, "Thank God, you were heaven sent." And when you're in these liminal moments, you will find yourself speaking in hyperbole. Poetry like Bread of Life or Heaven Sent will come closer to scratching the surface of reality than some rigid surveys about what is true and what is false. In these liminal moments, you'll find yourself stammering and going on and speaking in circles, and perhaps a bystander wouldn't be able to understand exactly what you're trying to communicate, but we could tell that you are experiencing something that exceeds the scales of usual measurement. Which brings us back to church and what we're doing today. Today we welcome new members, and in so doing, we talked about it. And the things that we say when we welcome new members are silly and hyperbolic. We promise to be positive, to listen, to think unity, to forgive, to value others. And are we going to do this? We are not going to do this. Just like any other community of people, we will fail. And if you take these promises with too much severity, you'll be sorely disappointed because this church will fail you. We will not live up to these promises and we will let you down. But we will keep trying. We will keep working. We will keep gathering together and employing hyperbolic, aspirational language to describe how God relates to us and how we relate to one another. Every person in this sanctuary is heaven sent. All of you are blessings from God, blessings to this community, blessings to one another. And if you don't believe that, just keep coming here. Keep saying it. Maybe if we talk about our feelings enough, eventually we'll believe them. Amen.